Bavinck's life is characterized by two things, I think. One is his conservative Calvinist orthodoxy, um, and the other is his active participation in modern society. So for him to be a Calvinist does not mean that you don't read, the latest developments in psychology or science or anything like that, and that you live in your mind as still the 17th century. So he's a Calvinist who's very much a man of his own day, with all the latest developments of things in his period. So, and I guess to a lot of readers over the past 100 years, that has seemed to be quite an odd combination. How can you be an orthodox and modern? Because a lot of
Right.
people assume those two things exist in tension.
Hmm.
So that gave rise over the course of the 20th century to people reading Bavinck and saying, but how can he want to be these two things? And this seems to be almost like there are two people writing here. And then that's the way that it developed in the ways that people would speak about him and write about him, that there was an Orthodox Bavinck and a modern Bavinck. And the puzzle of Bavinck's life was that he could never choose which of those two he wanted to be. So people would talk about him as a Jekyll and Hyde figure within the Reformed tradition. So you get lots of talk about this, about two poles in Bavinck's thought, about there being two Bavincks. And the way that started to develop in literature on Bavinck was that it was almost like redaction criticism in higher critical studies of the Bible, where you're trying to find which author really wrote this section of Isaiah, but there was no one Isaiah, or the same with Genesis or something like that. So you would find people who would write about, this section is the modern Bavinck. You move on a few pages and it's the Orthodox Bavinck, and then he moves back, and which is a really fruitless way, I think, to try and read him. And it relies on a lot of just assumptions about Bavinck that I don't think work. So my first book, it was called Trinity and Organism, and it was so there I really pushed back quite hard against what I call the two Bavincks hypothesis, and I think that theologically Bavinck's understanding of Calvinism meant that to be orthodox doesn't preclude participation in modernity, but also modernity itself is a thing that can accommodate orthodoxy. And I think that's what Bavinck was trying to do. He thought that orthodoxy is something that expresses itself and can express itself in any period in culture or history. And that's part of Christianity being a Catholic faith. It's not a faith that only works in the 16th century or in the Netherlands or in America. So I pushed back quite hard against that and said that we're wrong to talk about two Bavincks. We should only speak about one Bavinck. And you can actually see this in his theology with how it works. That diverse things hold together in the ways that Bavinck thinks, even things like orthodoxy and modernity. So I pushed back really hard against that in my first book. But the first book was about Bavinck's theology and not really Bavinck as a theologian. But I think in saying there weren't two Bavincks, there was only one. There's a kind of biographical impulse that was resounding in the first book, even though it's not a biography, that then led to me to think that I need to write a Bavinck biography that shows there was only one Bavinck, and what does it look like then when we don't look at his life assuming that everything was divided. Actually, I think he had a really capacious sense of the Catholicity of the Christian faith as a faith for all of life, and a faith for every culture, and a faith for every historical period, including the new one that he was born into. So I think the product of that then is the account of his life that I've tried to provide in the biography.